Hey guys, tonight we are crawling into one of the grittiest yet most fundamental aspects of the ancient world, answering the call of nature when you're poor in mighty ancient Rome. Forget the marble statues and the triumphal arches for a moment. You need to use the bathroom, and you need to do it now. Close your eyes and let the humid, oppressive heat of a Roman summer morning press against you. You are in your tiny, rickety room, maybe 5 stories up in a towering apartment block, called an insula. The air is thick with the smell of stale cooking oil, unwashed bodies, and something much, much worse. You can hear the distant, continuous rumble of carts on the cobblestones below and the high-pitched, irritable chatter of your neighbors already stirring. That low, persistent churning in your stomach is your urgent wake-up call, and you immediately realize the sheer, desperate logistics of your situation. You don't have a pipe or a flush. You have a ceramic pot, and you have gravity. You probably won't survive this for long without succumbing to disease or a grumpy sanitation worker. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me what's your location and what time is it where you are right now. It helps me picture where you're drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll off your thin pallet, the straw crackling beneath your weight. The floorboards are uneven and grimy, slick with centuries of accumulated dirt, and whatever liquids have seeped down from the rooms above you. You share this tiny space with your immediate family, a crowded, unceasing choreography of survival. The first most pressing task of your day is dealing with the remnants of the night. You reach for your chamber pot, the lacinum. It's a simple ceramic vessel, maybe cracked and chipped, but an absolutely vital piece of technology in your elevated existence. It has been your faithful companion through the dark hours, a silent repository of your human needs. Now it is heavy full and must be emptied. You trudge across the room, your eyes barely open, and peer out the window. Remember, you live on a floor that the wealthier tenants wouldn't touch. The cost of rent decreased. The higher you went precisely because of the inconvenience and danger involved in simple things like getting water, carrying food, and yes, disposing of waste. You are quite literally living in the cheap seats of the Roman Empire, and they come with a distinct lack of plumbing. The alley below you is already beginning to fill with the chaos of the city. A few sleepy early morning vendors are setting up their makeshift stalls, and a handful of bleary-eyed pedestrians are scurrying toward the bakeries or the public fountains. This is the moment of truth, the high-stakes gamble you take every single morning. You take a deep breath, and using both hands, you lift the heavy, sloshing lasanum. The air outside is cooler than inside your oven-hot room, but the stench rising from the street below is potent enough to make you reel. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact that adds a little spice to your morning routine. Roman law, specifically the provisions surrounding accidental dumping, acknowledge this practice. If you accidentally hit someone with your waste, you could be liable for damages, but the law assumed it was a possibility. It wasn't exactly encouraged, but it was certainly tolerated, a gritty compromise between dense urban living and non-existent sanitation infrastructure in the poor districts. The real risk wasn't necessarily legal trouble, but the very real chance of a neighbor's shouter, worse, a direct hit. You lean precariously out the window, your knuckles white against the rim of the pot. You must judge the trajectory, the wind, and the movement of life below. You can't just drop it all, that's a serious offense. The procedure is a quick, decisive tilt, letting the contents arc out and down ideally, splashing harmlessly into the middle of the unpaved street, or better yet, one of the overflowing, stagnant gutters that run alongside the curb. You are aiming for the open drain, which isn't really a drain so much as an untreated channel where everything collects. The sheer volume of waste being dumped from the insula windows every single day is staggering. Imagine every morning in a city of over 1 million people, thousands of pots are being tipped out simultaneously. A quirky or fringe tidbit you might consider is that some Roman satirists like Juvenal made great sport of this exact situation. He famously warned of the dangers of walking the city's streets, mentioning not just the risk of roof tiles falling on your head, but also the more squishy hazard, raining down from the high windows. He wrote that only a madman would venture out at night without making a will expecting to dodge not just falling debris, but the lasanum as well. It's funny, in a dark way, the ancient equivalent of sidewalk surfing through a minefield. You feel a small thrill of success as you hear the distinctive splat below, followed only by the normal din of the city, not a shout of outrage. You've done it. You've avoided fouling a passing neighbor, or more importantly, a passing vigil, the Roman equivalent of the city watch. As you step back from the window, the pot empty and the immediate crisis averted, you notice the pervasive, almost sweet smell of ammonia lingering in the air. This, in a strange way, is the smell of Roman industry, and it plays into the complex, often contradictory relationship Romans had with their own waste. The ammonia in urine, for example, was a valuable commodity used by fullers, the launderers, and textile workers for cleaning and whitening wool. It was a potent, natural detergent. So while you're dumping a nuisance, someone else later in the day may be actively collecting it. The immediate relief of having the pot empty is offset by the realization that you must now venture outside. The streets are calling, and they are not calling you to a leisurely brunch. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rate in ancient Rome was more attributable to poor diet, constant warfare, or simply the unspeakable sanitation conditions in the Subura, the dense working-class district where you live. Looking down at the street now, you tend to lean toward the sanitation theory. The entire street is a liquid organic tapestry of refuse runoff and the early morning deluge from your neighbor's windows. The simple act of putting on your sandals and stepping out the door is a commitment to wading through the city's collective filth. The real journey has only just begun. The goal, the communal public latrine. But before you get there, you must contend with the gauntlet of your own street. The worst is over, you think, wiping a bead of sweat from your forehead. The lasanum is empty, and the immediate personal pressure has been relieved. But as you prepare to leave your dingy room, the scale of the problem shifts from personal to civic. You descend the rickety wooden stairs of the insula, each step groaning in protest. There is no natural light here, just the faint, oily glimmer from a few small high windows and the constant smell of damp wood and human habitation. Down, down you go, passing neighbors who are just starting their own morning rituals. A quiet nod, a tired exchange of greetings, all of you united in the shared misery of vertical, crowded poverty. When you finally reach the ground level, you emerge onto the street like a diver surfacing from a deep polluted sea. This street, the one you just contributed to from 5 stories up, is an ecosystem of filth. It's unpaved here, a perpetually churned mix of mud, loose stones, market refuse, and of course the liquid deposits of every resident in your block. This is the street's liquid dangers, and it is not a metaphor. You have to walk carefully, picking your way across the uneven, often slippery surface. You lift your tunic a little higher than usual, a subconscious effort to protect the hem from the splash zone. You remember the time your neighbor, old Manius, slipped on a pile of vegetable peelings, mixed with something worse, and twisted his ankle. He couldn't work for weeks, That's a Roman reality check for you, one accidental skid on a street that doubles as a sewer, and your family is starving. This is a recurring, gnawing anxiety that colors your every step outside. The streets, particularly in the poorer districts like the Subura, are a fascinating blend of official neglect and organic convenience. They are narrow often, just wide enough for a single ox cart. And here is where a mainstream historical fact comes into play. The famous Roman roads, those marvels of engineering, were magnificent for moving armies and trade between cities, but the local street maintenance in crowded urban areas like yours was often woefully inadequate. The massive cloacamaxima, the great sewer, and the impressive aqueducts served the city's public baths, the wealthy homes on the hills and the imperial forums. They were a testament to Roman power. But they often skirted or totally ignored the high-density apartment blocks of the urban poor. You are literally living on the wrong side of the drainage pipes. As you navigate this organic obstacle course, you try to hop across the stepping stones. These are large raised stones placed at intervals across the street, a common feature in many Roman cities. They were originally designed to allow pedestrians to cross the street without getting their feet wet or more accurately steeped in the runoff. They look helpful, but they also complicate the movement of carts, slowing everything down. It's an imperfect, desperate solution. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the street vendors. They set up their stalls right on this messy thoroughfare. Imagine a food stall, perhaps selling hot pea soup or sausages mere inches, from a steaming pile of refuse. You see a vendor now expertly balancing his tripod brazier on a slightly higher patch of ground. He seems utterly unfazed by the odors, a true testament to the human capacity for sensory adaptation. Historians still argue whether the Roman public was more repulsed by the street filth or simply resigned to it as an unavoidable feature of urban life. Given the widespread and casual nature of the dumping, you suspect it's a mix of resignation and the constant nagging desire for a cheap, hot meal, even one sold on a precarious sewage-lined corner. You manage to sidle past a small group of market porters, arguing loudly over a spilled basket of onions. Onions, a luxury you can't often afford, now rolling into the muck. What a waste. You almost let out a small, tired laugh. That's probably the third joke I've offered so far. But honestly, what else are you going to do but laugh in the face of this absurdity? You are walking through what amounts to a trench of human effluent to get to a place where you can properly excrete more. The irony is thicker than the sludge coating your sandals. Your primary goal now is the public latrine. The closest one is about a 10-minute walk. Why not use the pot again? Well, the lasanum is fine for emergencies, but you have a social life such as it is, and a need for a more comfortable experience. The public latrine, despite its shared nature, represents a step up in civilization from your window ledge. It's a place of conversation, a public service, and sometimes a place of business. It's also the only place with anything resembling running water for disposal. You trudge onward, the rising sun now casting long shadows down the narrow street. You step over the occasional mound of horse dung, left by a passing carriage, a small mercy in a way because it's at least solid. As you pass one corner, you catch a familiar, pungent smell that isn't entirely foul. It's the unmistakable scent of a tanner's shop. You make a mental note of it because later, well, see how your humble waste becomes a literal component of the Roman economy, but for now, you just try to breathe through your mouth. You see a small trickle of relatively clean water running down the center of the street, but it's not from a sewer pipe. It's runoff from a public fountain, or perhaps a fuller's workshop further up the hill where they've been cleaning clothes using, you guessed, Ithuman urine as a cleaning agent. The Roman streets are a bizarre hydrological cycle of useful and utterly disgusting liquids, all mixing indiscriminately. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen mentioned in the very first section? You'd almost prefer that right now. At least it was dried. You finally turn a corner, and the air immediately feels slightly less suffocating. The houses here are a little shorter, and the street is wider, allowing more sunlight to hit the ground. Ahead you see a small structure with an unassuming entrance, the unmistakable destination of your morning quest, the public latrine. It is a place where every citizen, regardless of status, rubbed shoulders and where the most basic human function became a profoundly social, economic, and surprisingly complex affair. You steel yourself, prepare a few pleasantries for whoever you might meet, and step toward the archway, ready to navigate the peculiar etiquette of communal Roman hygiene. You step inside the archway, and the immediate change is startling. The intense, humid sun is gone, replaced by the cool, echoing darkness of the structure. This is the public latrine, the forica, and despite the purpose it serves, it feels almost monumental compared to the cramped confines of your insula room. It's a low, long hall, perhaps lined with a row of vaulted ceilings, and a palpable wave of heat, and a distinctive odorless of the raw street sewage smell. More of a concentrated, mineral-heavy steam washes over you. The latrine is surprisingly not empty. You spot perhaps a dozen other men already seated along the benches. Women, if they are poor, often use the privacy of a chamber pot or the darkness of night, as the public latrines were largely a male social domain. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Roman public latrine was a highly communal and open-plan space. Forget privacy stalls. There is a long marble or wooden bench running along the perimeter of the room, and set into that bench, perhaps 18 inches apart, are keyhole-shaped openings. You select an open spot, lift your tunic, and sit down. The sheer openness of the experience is something you've long grown used to, but it still strikes you as profoundly strange compared to your modern sensibilities. You are sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers engaged in the most intimate of acts. There is no small talk, or rather there is only small talk. People discuss politics, the price of grain, the latest gladiatorial games, or complain about their landlord while they sit and do their business. This truly is the ultimate equalizer. And one of the best jokes of the ancient world is that here senators and slaves sat on equal footing, often literally next to one another. Look down. Beneath the row of seats is a deep, swiftly flowing channel of water. This is the core of the sanitation system here. This water is usually wastewater diverted from a nearby aqueduct or from a public fountain, or most likely from the runoff of the luxurious public baths, the thermae, down the street. It rushes underneath the bench, carrying the effluents away and into a larger sewer which may or may not be the magnificent cloacamaxima we mentioned earlier. The sound of the running water is a continuous, reassuring white noise masking the more unpleasant sounds. You note the difference. This is clean, moving water, unlike the stagnant mess in your street. This is why you came here. Now for the economic reality. This service isn't always free. You may have to toss a small copper coinonaz or a quarter of an ace into a collection box near the entrance, depending on the management of this particular facility. Sometimes the fee is waived for the poor, or the latrine is subsidized by a wealthy benefactor eager to leave their mark on the city. You check your purse. If you have to pay, you will, because the alternative, returning to the street, is worse. The fact that access to basic sanitation was a paid service in Rome is a brutal reminder of the class divide that permeated every aspect of life. While you are seated, you can't help but notice the man sitting 2 spots down from you. He is dressed better than you, perhaps a middle-class merchant. He has brought a friend, and they are leaning across the empty seat between them discussing a shipment of Egyptian grain. This confirms a quirky or fringe tidbit latrines were sometimes used as informal meeting places for business transactions and political plotting. It was one of the few places where people from different social classes could genuinely mingle, though not always comfortably. Speaking of comfort, it's not just about the sitting. Now comes the post-functionary part. You look around and see everyone reaching for the same cleaning implement. This is the xylospongium, or the sponge on a stick. You see a trough of constantly running water, a second channel usually in front of your feet, where these sponges are collectively rinsed after use. This is where the whole system breaks down from genius engineering to terrifying germ factory. You take a deep breath and remind yourself of the etiquette. You pick up the sponge closest to you. It's not your sponge. It's the sponge. It is shared. You use it. You rinse it in the running water trough, and you place it back. Historians still argue whether the xylospongium was always shared, or if some patrons rented private sponges for a fee. Given your current economic situation and the reality of this latrine, you know exactly how it works here. It's a shared resource, and the water rinsing it is the only form of sanitation. You try not to dwell on how many people have used this specific sponge today or this week. You focus instead on the relief of having a running water source nearby, even if it's for this terrifyingly unhygienic purpose. You finish stand-up and pull your tunic down. Before leaving, you might quickly dip your fingers into the cold, clean water of a third channel, often found near the exit. This one sometimes used for a token hand rinse, which is a small comfort. It doesn't sterilize anything, of course, but it's the thought that counts. You feel lighter, cleaner, at least temporarily, and ready to face the market. As you exit the cool, damp building and step back into the heat of the Roman day, you leave the system of flowing water and shared etiquette behind. You are back in the land of your apartmenta, tower of neglect. You've used the public solution, but the greater structural problem of waste in your own home still lingers. The sewer lines that serve the latrine stop here. They do not extend to the poor man's multi-story dwelling. And that is a problem you'll have to deal with when you return to your insula tonight, because within that block of apartments lies a much more contained but far more toxic problem, the cesspit. You laugh weakly, a private joke this time, thinking about the Romans' incredible aqueducts, delivering fresh water only for the removal of waste to be such a haphazard, social, and often disgusting affair. The brief respite of the public latrine is over. You're fueled momentarily, relieved, and now you can focus on the next great achievement of Roman engineering, the aqueducts and sewers, but viewed strictly from the perspective of the poor. As you walk back toward your insula, you pass under one of the arches of an immense aqueduct. It's an undeniable masterpiece, a towering line of stone that marches across the landscape, bringing millions of gallons of pristine mountain water into the city. Here's a mainstream historical fact that puts this into sharp focus. Rome had 11 major aqueducts operating at its peak, providing an estimated billion liters of water a day. This volume of water was unprecedented in the ancient world and remains astonishing even by some modern standards. The water was primarily fed into public fountains where you collect your daily drinking water, the extravagant public baths thermae, and the homes of the extreme elite. But, and this is the crucial distinction, this clean water system was not built with the specific intention of flushing the individual stacked apartments of the poor. You look up at the stone channel far above you. The water is pristine, flowing rapidly toward the distribution points. It's a miracle of supply, but a failure of distribution when it comes to sanitation for your neighborhood. The water that eventually reaches your street, that which flows under the latrine benches, is often after it has been used by the wealthy or for a public function. The purpose of all that water wasn't just to provide a drink. It was also to provide a massive volume of flow to wash away the city's waste through the sewers. This brings us back to the cloacamaxima, the greatest sewer. You know the name, you know the legend. It's one of the oldest and most enduring structures in Rome, originally built by the Etruscan kings and later maintained and expanded by the Republic and the Empire. It's a massive underground tunnel, large enough in some places to drive a cart through, built to drain the marshy ground of the Forum and carry storm water and waste into the Tiber River. Historians still argue whether the cloacamaxima was designed primarily for human waste, or if its initial function was simply to serve as a storm drain with human waste being added later as the city's population exploded and other smaller sewers were built. The reality for you, the poor Roman, is that this marvel of engineering mostly serves the central, powerful, and wealthy districts. You live slightly on the periphery of this grand system. The sewer lines that run under the public latrine you just visited are often secondary or tertiary branches, and they certainly don't loop back to service the multi-story insulae. Your building, like most of your neighbors, is simply not connected to the main flow. The engineers didn't account for the verticality of poverty. They designed for ground-level luxury. This is where the engineering stops, and the nasty reality of the cesspit begins. As you turn off the main thoroughfare and into the narrow, crowded alley where your insula is located, the smell intensifies again. This is a specific, acrid, deep stench that signals you are close to home. Within the walls of your apartment building, or perhaps tucked beneath a courtyard, or even a ground-floor room that the landlord can't rent out, is the faux v the cesspit. A quirky or fringe tidbit about these cesspits is how they were often disguised or simply ignored until they became a critical disaster. They were typically deep holes, sometimes lined with stone or brick, sometimes just dug into the earth, designed to collect the effluents from any ground-floor latrines, and crucially the overflow from the waste that inevitably made its way down through cracks pipes or poorly maintained drains from the floors above. It's a collective underground holding tank for the block, and it is a toxic reservoir of disease. The ground floor tenants suffer the most, they get the lowest rent, but they are also right on top of the chemical reaction. The waste seeps into the walls, the earth, and the very air they breathe. For you 5 stories up, the problem is logistical, the chamber pot. But for the people on the first floor, the problem is existential. And here's the grim truth about the fovea. It is very, very rarely emptied. The process is expensive, disruptive, and noxious. Landlords, notorious for their stinginess and apathy toward the tenants, will put off cleaning the cesspit until it literally overflows or collapses. When it does, it's a monumental, horrifying event, a sudden deluge of centuries of waste pouring into the lower levels of the building or bubbling up into the street. It's a slow-motion public health catastrophe that your entire community is sitting on. The only way to manage this accumulation is through the next class of uncelebrated essential Roman workers, the night soil men or the stercorarii. But that's a dangerous story for when the sun goes down. Right now, you just need to get back inside, grab a meager meal, and start your day's work, carrying the physical and psychological weight of knowing that your home is perched above a ticking subterranean bomb of human waste. You'll have a small, tired huff this time, because you just spent a minute marveling at the genius of the aqueducts, only to realize that the end result of that genius for you is sitting above a giant hole of festering filth. That's Rome. As the sun begins its slow, arduous descent, painting the narrow Roman sky in shades of bruised purple and ochre, the sanitation problem of your insula becomes immediate and personal once more. You've worked all day, perhaps humping cargo down at the Tiber wharves, or maybe toiling as a day laborer on a construction site. You're exhausted, and the urgency of the morning's needs returns, though now without the option of a quick trip to the public latrine, which is closing up for the night or becoming too dangerous to walk to through the shadowy streets. The darkness brings with it the realm of the night soil men, or the stercorarii. You are back in your cramped apartment, and the sounds of the night are a new symphony of urban life. The scraping of cooking pots, hushed arguments, and the occasional unsettling scurry of rats in the ceiling. The lasanum is needed again, and the morning's casual dumping from the windows too risky under the cover of night when the streets are empty and the splash is far more noticeable. So you must rely on the services of these specialists, the men who deal with the contents of your waste at home, and the ones who will eventually clear out the cesspit below you. The stercorarii occupy one of the lowest rungs on the Roman social ladder. Their job is universally reviled, incredibly demanding, and profoundly dangerous, yet absolutely essential. They are the sanitation workers of the poor, the ones who haul away the accumulated human and animal waste, the night soil that accumulates in the city's overflowing cesspits, and sometimes, if you pay extra, from individual homes. This is a mainstream historical fact. The removal of waste was a private enterprise, a necessity turned into a low-level business with no organized, state-run municipal collection service for private residences. The process of emptying the fovea, that subterranean time bomb we talked about, is an epic undertaking. It requires specialized equipment, long scoops, ropes, buckets, and strong backs. You can imagine the scene when they finally come to your building, the digging, the endless, sickening labor of bailing out a pit that might be meters deep and collecting the waste into carts or containers. The stench is so overwhelming it can be smelled blocks away, leading to loud complaints and often violence from neighbors who feel the work is too disruptive. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the timing of their work. The stercorarii usually operated at night or in the very early hours before dawn, not just because the streets were less crowded, but because the darkness offered a slight masking of the appalling visual and olfactory reality of their job. They literally moved through the sleeping city, loaded with human waste, making them phantoms of the Roman night. They were paid a pittance, but they also charged a high price for their service, which is why your landlord puts off the cesspit cleaning until the last possible moment. Now consider the individual transaction. You need to dispose of the contents of your lasanum. If you can't dump it from the window and you can't get to the public latrine, your options narrow. Some poor Romans would simply take the pot's contents and add it to a large, common bucket, kept in a corner of the building's shared courtyard. Once full, this bucket might be emptied by a passing stercorarius, who collects not just from the cesspits, but also from these secondary collection points. You are essentially paying someone to carry your waste away, a small recurring fee that chips away at your already meager earnings. The sheer difficulty of the task also meant it was frequently done haphazardly. Historians still argue whether the stercorarii sometimes simply dumped their loads into the nearest largest sewer or river outlet rather than hauling it all the way outside the city walls to the designated dumps or collection sites for processing. Given the incentives, less travel, less effort, less time spent with the foul cargort, it is highly likely that they often cut corners, turning secondary sewer branches into primary dumping grounds, and contributing to the very street filth you tried to avoid this morning. You hear the rumble of a cart outside. No, it might be a midnight delivery, Or it might be the slow, heavy progress of one of these night soil carts. The sound is distinctive, often followed by the guttural shouts of the workmen and the clip-clop of a weary mule. You pause your simple meal of bread and watery wine listening. You feel a strange mix of disgust and gratitude for these men who perform the necessary but repulsive task that allows the city to continue functioning. They are the ultimate embodiment of Rome's reliance on the marginalized to maintain the superficial splendor of its marble centers. Their final destination is crucial and brings us to the surprisingly complex economic value of your waste. They are not just dumping it, they are often selling it. Your human waste or excrement has a market price. It's about to become a vital ingredient in Roman industry and agriculture, a strange, cyclical economy where filth becomes fertility. It's almost laughable in a dark, weary way that the very substance that makes your life miserable is a valuable commodity to someone else. You'll explore that particular irony next, but for now you just hope that the cart you hear is moving away from your apartment and not stopping right beneath you. The night is deep now, and the distant rumble of the night soil carts, the stercorarii we just talked about, reminds you that your personal waste has a strange destiny beyond your window or your cesspit. You are exhausted, but the thought of the city's underbelly, the hidden economics of filth, keeps a tiny part of your weary mind alert. This is the curious reality of the feces economy, where one person's refuse becomes another's raw material, and your daily output is a surprisingly valuable commodity. This is where the poor Romans waste the night soil collected. With such difficulty leaves the city and enters the strange cycles of industry and agriculture. It's not just dumped, much of it is sold. The chief buyers fall into two main categories, tanners and farmers. Let's start with the tanners. You may have noticed that acrid, powerful smell near certain street corners, the one that makes your eyes water. That's the smell of a tannery. Tanning leather is a brutal, smelly business, but essential for making everything from sandals to armor. Here's a quirky or fringed tidbit. Human excrement was prized by tanners because of its chemical properties. Specifically, the high nitrogen content in the feces helped to break down and soften the animal hides. It was part of the process of curing and preparing the leather before it could be worked. So the waste that caused so much logistical misery in your insula was in a twisted way essential for keeping the wheels of Roman industry turning. Tanners often set up shop near the edges of the city or close to the sewer outlets, both to manage the water needed for their work and to easily access the necessary, shall we say, raw materials. Then there are the farmers. This is the more straightforward ancient use of human waste as fertilizer. Rome was a gargantuan city consuming vast amounts of grain, olive oil, and wine. To sustain this, the agricultural land surrounding the city needed to be constantly replenished. The mainstream historical fact is that the use of human manure, or latrine, was an ancient and well-documented practice. Roman agricultural writers often detailed the value of various manures and human waste when properly composted, and mixed was considered highly effective. The farmers outside the walls were a major destination for the stercorarii carts. It was a perfect, if disgusting, closed-loop system. The fields feed the city, and the city in turn feeds the fields. The stercorarii weren't just low-paid laborers. They were in effect logistics managers in this feces economy, selling their loads to the highest bidder, usually the tanner, who needed it immediately, or the farmer who needed it seasonally. This ability to sell the waste is what made the night soil collection a viable if wretched business. You, the poor Roman, were inadvertently contributing to both the clothing and the food supply of the empire. You laugh softly, That's probably the lightest joke you've made all night, that your body's natural functions are literally underwriting the Roman economy. This economic reality also explains why waste was so often dumped outside the city walls. The city's filth was not just an environmental hazard, it was an agricultural resource. Huge mounds of refuse would accumulate near the city gates, mixed with everything from broken pottery to ash, and these mountains of waste were gradually hauled away by the farmers. But let's think about the ethical and health implications. Historians still argue whether the practice of using unsterilized human waste as fertilizer contributed significantly to the spread of disease in the Roman diet. While Romans understood generally that manure was good for crops, they lacked the knowledge of microbiology. The cycle of contamination, from person to waste, to field to food to person, was a vicious one that science wouldn't understand for nearly 2 millennia. You ate the crops fertilized by the same filth you were trying to escape. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from way back in Section 1. The use of animal excrement in cosmetics and medicine was seen as exotic and useful. The use of human excrement, however, was just a harsh industrial reality. It lacked the exotic appeal, but it drove fundamental parts of the Roman economy. For you, the poor tenant, this entire system remains distant. You rarely see the money exchange hands, you just pay the man to take your bucket. But knowing that the material you are so desperately trying to remove from your life is considered a resource by others adds another layer to the complex indignity of your poverty. Your waste is valuable, but you are not. The heavy silence of the night returns broken only by the sound of your own breathing. You've explored the shared communal latrine, the dangers of the street, the job of the night soil men, and now the wider economy of the filth. It's time to shift your perspective slightly, to consider the slight improvements, the mere glimpse of better sanitation that a slightly less poor Roman might enjoy even in a crowded city block. A small luxury, perhaps, a private latrine that you unfortunately do not possess. You are deeply entrenched in the reality of your 5-story insulae world, defined by the high risk and inconvenience of the chamber pot and the toxic shared secret of the overflowing cesspit. But let's pause your journey for a moment to consider the neighbors just a step above you on the economic ladder, the ones who had a slight reprieve from this daily horror. This is a fleeting glimpse into private latrines for the not quite poor. Imagine you've managed to save enough money, or perhaps you work for a slightly wealthier patron who provides housing. You might occupy a ground-floor apartment, or maybe a small, attached, single-family house, a domus, often tucked away in a less dense part of the city. For this small increase in fortune, you gain a monumental improvement in dignity and health, your own private latrine, a latrina. This private space wasn't anything fancy. It was usually a small, cramped room, perhaps built into the corner of the kitchen or next to the wash area, often sharing a wall with the building's exterior. Inside, you wouldn't find a marble seat like the public ones. Instead, there might be a simple wooden seat with a single hole. Beneath this hole, however, is the key difference, a direct connection to a small, private cesspit fovea, or, in the very best-case scenario, an actual narrow drain that might connect to a secondary sewer line. The simple, mainstream historical fact is that the possession of a private latrine, however primitive, was the single greatest indicator of sanitation status and a major health advantage in ancient Rome. It eliminated the daily peril of dumping the lacinum out the window, and it removed the need for the anxiety-inducing communal use of the xylospongium at the public foraca. The convenience of being able to go to the bathroom inside your own 4 walls without fear of hitting a passerby or being exposed to the multitude of diseases circulating in the public sponge water was a colossal luxury. Now, even these private latrines were often rudimentary. They might be flushed only intermittently, perhaps when household slaves, if the owner was wealthy enough to have them poured buckets of wastewater from the kitchen or the wash basin down the hole. In your slightly better off neighbor's home, they might have a sink and a drain that leads directly to the latrine opening, providing a minimal but constant flow of wastewater to help clear the bowl. This is the simple concept of a gravity-fed semi-flush toilet, a small wonder of domestic engineering. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Archaeological excavations often find remnants of dinner parties and religious rituals inside these small latrine pits. Why? Because the pit was a convenient place to dispose of trash and broken pottery, not just human waste. This mix of refuse bones, discarded lamps, coins, and human waste offers archaeologists a fascinating if smelly cross-section of Roman daily life and diet. For the inhabitants, it meant that even their private sanitation pit was a mixed bag of disposal, not purely a clean channel for waste. Despite the privacy, the ultimate fate of the waste often remained the same. It still had to go somewhere. If the private drain connected to a sewer, fantastic. If it simply led to a dedicated private fovea right below the floor, which was often the case, that pit still needed to be emptied by the stercorarii we discussed earlier. The difference was that the homeowner paid the bill, not the absent, negligent landlord of a huge insula. This meant the private pit was likely emptied more frequently, reducing the chance of catastrophic overflow, and crucially reducing the constant exposure to pathogens. Historians still argue whether the existence of private latrines for the slightly better off poor actually improved overall public health, or if it simply concentrated the waste of the lower classes into the unmanaged public realm, making life worse for the residents of the towering insulae, like yours. It's a classic question of trickle-down sanitation. Did the rich keeping their waste out of the streets help, or did the poor being excluded from the sewer system hurt them more? You look back at your own window, recalling the quick, desperate tilt of the Lasanum this morning. The difference between you and the man with a small, clean ground floor hole is the difference between constant, low-grade fear and a modicum of stability. It's a difference measured not in gold, but in gallons of raw sewage avoided. You sigh a tired breath and turn your mind toward another surprising aspect of Roman waste management that often used its byproducts for cleanliness, the fullers and their bizarre relationship with urine. You remember that sweet, acrid smell of ammonia from the street this morning. It's time to find out why that smell was actually a sign of economic activity, and strangely, a form of hygiene. The sun is officially down, and the city's air, though cooler, is still thick with the layered smells of Rome. We've talked about waste being sold to tanners and spread on fields, but there is one more, highly specialized and equally essential industry that relies directly on a component of human waste, the fullers, and their demand for urine. You often smell this industry before you see it, and it brings us to a slightly cleaner, though still peculiar, intersection of sanitation and commerce. The fullers, or fullones, were the Roman textile workers and launderers. They were responsible for cleaning, bleaching, and generally finishing woolen cloth and garments, and their secret weapon, the indispensable ingredient for their trade, was stale human urine. This is a mainstream historical fact and one of the most surprising industrial uses of Roman waste. Why urine? The magic ingredient is ammonia. As urine sits, it breaks down into ammonia, a powerful natural detergent and bleaching agent. It cuts through grease and dirt in wool far more effectively than plain water or the harsh lye soaps available at the time. Fullers would tread the cloth in huge vats filled with urine and water, a truly unpleasant job, perhaps even worse than being a stercorarius. Can you imagine standing barefoot in a pool of fermented pee stomping dirty togas clean? It's the ultimate Roman power wash. You see the evidence of this industry everywhere. If you pass a large public bathhouse or a busy intersection, you might notice clay pots or barrels set out specifically for people to relieve themselves. This isn't just a matter of convenience. It's an early form of public waste collection that directly feeds the fullones business. You, the poor Roman, might even contribute to this without thinking using one of these pots when you're out and about during the day. But there was also a dedicated collection business. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the Emperor Vespasian famously instituted a tax on the collection of urine, which led to the famous Latin phrase, pecunia non olet, money does not smell. His son Titus complained about taxing such a foul substance, and Vespasian allegedly held up a coin to his nose and made that famous retort. The sheer fact that urine collection was extensive enough to be worth taxing tells you everything you need to know about its economic value. The fullones were one of the few groups in the Roman economy who actively wanted the city's waste products. They would pay the collectors for their barrels of stale urine. Sometimes fullers would even set up shop right next to public latrines, where they had an immediate and guaranteed supply of the resource, making the latrine an early example of co-located industrial and sanitation infrastructure. Historians still argue whether the urine collected in the public latrine troughs was used directly by the fullers or whether it was simply flushed away. Given the economic value, it is highly likely that at least some latrines had contracts with fullers to divert the urine to their vats before it hit the main sewer. This reliance on urine for cleaning creates a fascinating contrast. You are living in conditions of almost constant low-grade filth, where diseases are rampant due to poor waste management. Yet a fundamental aspect of your cleanliness, the washing of your clothes and the preparation of your textiles, relies directly on the same organic waste you are trying so desperately to expel from your life. It's a delicate, disturbing irony. The agent of your industrial cleanliness is the byproduct of your sanitation failure. As you settle back into your crowded room, the memory of the day's constant battle against waste fades into the sound of your neighbor's quiet breathing. You've covered the ground, the dump from the window, the shared sponge, the cesspit, the night soil men, and the strange economies of filth. Now it's time to confront the inevitable consequence of this system, the constant unseen danger of disease. The Roman environment is not just unpleasant, it is lethal, and the way the poor went to the bathroom is a direct line to the high mortality rates that plagued the city. You feel a familiar low ache in your stomach, a reminder that illness is a perpetual shadow in your crowded life. You lie still in the dark, the sounds of your neighbors, the only barrier between you and the deep silence of the Roman night. You are bone-tired, but your mind is now focused on the unseen enemy, the inevitable cost of living amidst the filth we've discussed. This is the constant terrifying threat of disease and the vicious cycle of Roman sanitation. For you, the poor resident of the insula, the lack of sanitation wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a death sentence waiting to be delivered by water, air, or touch. The open nature of waste disposal created a perfect environment for what we now understand as pathogenic bacteria and viruses to thrive and circulate. Let's start with the most obvious culprit, water contamination. You get your drinking water from a public fountain filled by one of those magnificent aqueducts. That water starts pristine, but by the time you're carrying it back to your apartment, it has passed through distribution pipes, many of which were made of lead, a mainstream historical fact that contributed to chronic health problems. More immediately dangerous, though, is the ground contamination. The constant leakage from the cesspits fovi beneath your building, the runoff from the chamber pots dumped into the street, and the general saturation of the earth with raw sewage meant that contamination inevitably seeped into any shallower local water sources and even the soil where food might be grown. The diseases that were endemic to ancient Rome read like a grim roster of public health disaster: typhoid fever, dysentery, the flux cholera, and various forms of gastroenteritis. These are all diseases that thrive in conditions where feces contaminate the water and food supply. The very act of fetching water, buying bread from a street vendor, whose stall is next to an open drain, or rinsing your hands with the xylospongium at the public latrine, introduced pathogens directly into your system. You might feel a pang of nausea now just thinking about that shared sponge. Here is a quirky or fringe tidbit that underscores the lack of knowledge Romans were often highly aware of miasmas, the theory that diseases were caused by bad air or foul smells. They often equated the stench of the sewers with the illness itself, which, while partially true, the smell indicated the presence of contamination, led them to focus on perfumes and incense rather than on effective sanitation practices, like boiling water or separating sewage from drinking sources. They got the symptom right, but missed the underlying cause. The cycle of contamination is brutal. You contract dysentery from contaminated water. You use your chamber pot. The contents are dumped into the street or into the communal cesspit. The bacteria from your illness are now out in the environment, contaminating the street, potentially fouling the groundwater and being handled by the stercorarii or market vendors. Someone else touches the street, buys contaminated food, or steps on an infected spot, and the cycle continues. This is the vicious cycle of Roman urban poverty. The result is a devastatingly high rate of infant and child mortality. Children being closer to the ground, more susceptible to dehydration from diarrhea, and constantly exposed to germs in their play areas, which were often the filthy streets, simply did not survive into adulthood in the same numbers as today. The average lifespan in Roman cities was shockingly low, a fact that historians universally link to these unmanaged urban conditions. The constant exposure to low-level contamination also led to chronic, debilitating conditions. Worms and parasites were rampant, further weakening the body and making you more susceptible to acute infections. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite understood the true link between sanitation and disease. While they certainly benefited from having private latrines and access to clean water filtered through the aqueducts' settling tanks, and they built hospitals valetudinaria, the overall infrastructure suggests a greater focus on convenience and aesthetics than on rigorous public health science. The poor were simply left to suffer the consequences of an otherwise advanced society's greatest infrastructure failure. The only place you could truly escape this mess was ironically the most public of places, the bathhouse. But even that was a temporary, almost symbolic reprieve. You wake with the lingering low-grade discomfort that is your constant companion, the result of the vicious cycle of disease we just talked about. But today you have a plan for temporary escape, a moment of respite from the physical and olfactory assault of your everyday life. You're heading to the public baths, the thermae. This is your attempt to find cleanliness, though it's wrapped up in a much larger social and ritualistic package. The public bathhouse is one of the true glories of Roman life, and a mainstream historical fact everyone knows. These complexes were enormous, beautiful, often free or very cheap, and offered an array of services: gymnasia, libraries, and of course the series of heated rooms for bathing. You can afford the small entrance fee, perhaps a quarter of an, as that same tiny coin you might pay to use the public latrine, because the emperor or a wealthy benefactor usually subsidize the operation. You enter the grand building, the air immediately warmer and wetter than the outside. The floors are mosaic, the walls covered in marble veneera, staggering contrast to the mud and planking of your insula. As you move through the process from the apoditarium changing room to the palaestra exercise yard, and then into the heated rooms, you are participating in a profoundly Roman ritual. But let's be clear, while the bathhouse offered a form of physical cleaning, it was not the panacea for the sanitation problems we've been exploring. The cleansing ritual involved scraping dirt and oil off your skin with a curved metal instrument called a strigil, followed by washing in the large communal pools. The water in the pools was warm, relaxing, and often changed only intermittently, which leads us to a slightly less savory detail. You're bathing with hundreds of other people, some of whom carry the very diseases you are trying to escape. The bathhouse was more about social ritual exercise and heat therapy than modern germ theory sanitation. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. The same strigil you use to scrape sweat and grime from your body when used on a gladiator had a strange curative afterlife. The residue, a mix of oil, sweat, and dirt, was often collected and sold as a novelty medicine or an exotic beauty ointment. Yes, people bought and applied gladiator sweat. Talk about a questionable ingredient list. This, like the use of crocodile dung sunscreen, mentioned way back, shows the bizarre lengths Romans would go to for perceived health and beauty benefits. You finally sink into the warm water of the caldarium, the hot room. The heat makes you sweat out the grime and the relative purity of the water, though communalis, a huge improvement over the pervasive filth of your neighborhood. The bathhouse is for a few hours your clean slate, your temporary escape from the odor and logistics of waste management. The cleanliness is fleeting, however. The bathhouse uses vast amounts of water drawn directly from the aqueducts. After passing through the various pools and tanks, this water is discharged. This is a crucial link to our narrative. This slightly dirty but still flowing water is often the same water that gets diverted to run through the channels beneath the public latrines forica you use, acting as the primary flushing mechanism. So in a sense, the luxury of the wealthy and the public's ritual, cleanliness in the thermi, is directly subsidizing the basic sewage removal of the foricae. Historians still argue whether the high attendance at public baths was motivated more by genuine desire for hygiene or by the intense need for social interaction and leisure in a city where home life, particularly for the poor, was so cramped and uncomfortable. For you, it's likely a mix. The feeling of the sweat-slicked dirt being scraped away is satisfying, but the chatter, the warmth, and the brief sense of social equality are just as valuable. But as the evening wears on, you must leave this clean, warm oasis and return to the grit and stench of your insula. The relief is temporary, the disease is still lurking in the street, and the cesspit is still waiting. You are reminded that the public works of Rome often created beautiful islands of luxury, the baths and functional systems of relief, the latrine trenches, but they never solve the fundamental problem of private, high-density residential waste. The Romans relied on their advanced engineering, but they also relied on magic and superstition, turning to a host of strange minor gods to protect them from the dangers hiding in the filth. The relief of the bathhouse has faded, replaced by the cool dampness of the evening. You are back in your insula, the smells returning with a vengeance. We've examined the physics and the economy of Roman waste, but now let's briefly touch on the metaphysics, the strange layer of superstition and divine intervention that Romans layered onto their sanitation anxieties. You see, when the engineering failed, they turned to the gods. You are navigating the world of Roman gods and toilet superstitions. The Romans, ever pragmatic, had a god for almost every function and transition in life. And that absolutely included the journey to the latrine and the perils within the sewage system. These were minor, often humorous, but intensely relevant deities to the life of the poor who face the highest health risks. This reliance on divine protection is a mainstream historical fact, reflecting the deep-seated fear of unseen dangers emanating from the waste. One of the most important and strangest of these deities was Cloacina. She was the goddess of the sewer, specifically associated with the great sewer, the cloacamaxima. Her name is derived from the Latin word for sewer cloaca. Her presence was not one of disgust, but one of purification and protection. She was the one who ensured the successful flow and cleansing of the city's waste. You might offer a small prayer to her before entering the public latrine, hoping she prevents an unexpected backup or an infestation of rats. But the sheer number of minor deities is where the story gets really bizarre, providing a quirky or fringe tidbit. The process of defecation itself had its own dedicated pantheon. You might invoke Stercorarii or Sterculius, the god of manuring who was invoked to ensure your excrement would become fertile and useful. Then there was Crepitus, a very minor god often associated with flatulence, a light-hearted nod to the sounds accompanying the communal experience in the Forica. There was even Fornax, initially a goddess of ovens, who was sometimes referenced in the context of the burning of waste. These gods were invoked in small rituals, whispered prayers, or through small shrines found near the cesspits or latrines. Why so many gods for a simple act? Because the latrine, the cesspit, and the street were viewed as liminal spaces, boundaries between the ordered human world and the dangerous, chaotic underworld. Roman religion held that spirits and dangers could emerge from deep pits and holes in the earth. The constant presence of disease, which they couldn't explain scientifically, was often attributed to angry spirits or curses hiding in the darkness of the latrines. You know that the high volume of water in the public latrines was meant to wash away the physical waste. But the small niches often found in the walls of the foricae were meant for small statues or images of the gods or for offerings, an attempt to appease the gods and wash away the spiritual dangers as well. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these humorous and functional minor gods was a sign of genuine religious belief among the poor, a form of gentle satire against the more formal state religion, or simply a practical attempt to cope with the daily horrors of unsanitary life. For you, it's probably a bit of all three. You don't seriously believe that a statue will stop a rat from biting you while you sit, but a quiet prayer to cloacina doesn't cost anything and offers a fraction of peace in a place where you are most vulnerable. You recall the earlier image of the man selling food next to the sewage runoff, Section 2, or the man sitting next to you at the public latrine, Section 3. The only thing that truly separated you from the sickness that lurked in the environment was often sheer luck. And if luck was a god, then these toilet deities were her busiest attendants. You chuckle quietly. That's the third light joke for this segment, because imagine trying to explain to a foreign visitor why you just made an offering to the god of farts before doing your business. The sun will rise soon. The brief darkness of the night is coming to an end, and with it, the quiet time of reflection. You've come full circle from the lacinum in your hand down to the cesspit, out to the public bath, and back to the spiritual protection offered by a toilet goddess. It's time to conclude this journey to reflect on the persistent grinding struggle that defines your existence as a poor Roman where the simple act of using the bathroom is a continuous, tiresome burden. The first rays of the sun are now painting the high windows of the opposite insula. Your journey is nearing its end, but the reality of your life, the perpetual struggle, remains unchangeable. You've gone to the bathroom, you've cleaned up, you've avoided getting sick for now, and you've prayed to cloacamaxima. But you're not out of the woods. The constant, tiring burden of waste management is woven into the very fabric of your existence as a poor Roman. You reflect on the day-to-day choices that define your poverty, and how each one is tied to filth. You choose to live 5 stories up because the rent is cheap, but the cost is the daily peril of dumping the lasanum from the window section 2, or navigating the stairs in the dark to use a communal courtyard bucket, section 5. You walk a 10-minute distance to a public latrine, because it offers the miracle of running water, section 3, but you risk catching a deadly disease from the shared xylospongium, section 3, and from the vicious cycle of street contamination, section 9. You buy your cheap hot food from a street vendor, section 2, knowing that his stall is likely positioned near an open drain, furthering your risk of typhoid or dysentery. This is a mainstream historical fact. The quality of sanitation in ancient Rome was fundamentally dictated by economic status. The wealthy had their clean, aqueduct-fed pipes running directly into their homes, often leading to a private sewer connection. You, the poor Roman, were relegated to a system of makeshift collection, toxic accumulation, the cesspit, or fovea from section 4, and reliance on the marginalized stercorarii, section 5, to remove the waste that you ironically helped turn into valuable commodities for tanners and farmers. Section 6, the public infrastructure, the baths. Section 10, the aqueducts. Section 4 and the grand sewers were marvels of engineering, but they were not designed to solve your problem. They were designed for the state, the elite, and public ritual. The struggle is not just physical, it is psychological. It's the constant low-grade anxiety of illness, the fear of losing your meager savings to pay a doctor, and the knowledge that your home, your refuge, is built atop a pit of festering refuse. You are constantly fighting the environment in which you live, a silent, exhausting battle against odors, germs, and liquid dangers. You may have escaped the street filth, but you can't escape the air which carries the ammonia of the fuller's urine collection, section 8, mixed with the pervasive stench of the city. Here is a quirky or fringe tidbit that underscores the pervasive nature of this struggle. Roman historians, when cataloging city life, frequently discuss the sheer volume of refuse, leading to constant debates in the Senate about waste removal and street cleanliness. Yet few serious, sustained municipal programs were ever established to service the poor. The problem was perennial, acknowledged, and perpetually deferred, leaving people like you to manage it with clay pots and prayers to minor gods like Stercorarii, section 11. Historians still argue whether the high tolerance for filth in Roman cities was due to a genuine cultural indifference or simply a byproduct of the massive population density that overwhelmed any practical sanitation solution for the lower classes. Regardless of the reason, the consequence is the same for you, a life defined by the necessity of enduring the unendurable. You feel the slight warmth of the coming day on your face. The sun is up. The street will soon be alive with the noise and chaos of vendors, donkeys, and neighbors making their own precarious trips. You survived the night. You navigated the sanitation perils of the morning. Now you must stand up, put on your well-worn sandals, and step out onto the street again, knowing that the battle against the city's endless filth starts anew. It is a tiring, repetitive, and entirely unromantic existence, but It is yours. The sun has fully risen, now flooding the narrow streets with Roman morning light. The quiet of the pre-dawn has been replaced by the roar of the city, and the rhythm of your perpetual struggle against filth begins anew. You are back on the street, and though the morning's urgent business is complete, the city presents 1,000 small new challenges, each one related to the flow and management of waste. We've covered almost every aspect, but there are still details on the edges of the sanitation picture that define your daily life. Let's focus on the persistent messiness of waste flow. Your walk to your day labor involves navigating a different route. And today you see a problem, a blocked public drain, a low-lying section of the street which usually carries rainwater, and the runoff from a nearby public fountain is now backing up. The water, already murky, is pooling and stagnating. This is a common sight, and a grim reminder that the Roman sewer system, advanced as it was a mixed bag, particularly where it met the street in the poor districts. The drains often became clogged with refuse kitchen scraps, market waste, and the occasional heavy solid deposit from a high window dump, like the one you performed in Section 1. Here is a mainstream historical fact to illustrate this. While the main sewer lines of the cloacamaxima were magnificent, the smaller tertiary drains and street gutters were often little more than open channels. These channels were not covered, leading to constant dumping and clogging. When the street flooded, as it does now, it wasn't just rainwater. It was a potent cocktail of all the effluents from the surrounding insulae and shops, creating a breeding ground for the same diseases we discussed in Section 9. You must step off the raised stepping stone, Section 2, and wade through the pooling muck. You curse quietly under your breath, not out of malice, but out of sheer tired frustration. This tiny diversion is a constant hazard. It slows you down, dirties your clothes, and increases your risk of stepping on something sharp or contaminated. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the occasional practice of using pigs to clean the streets. In some parts of Rome, and certainly in other ancient cities, pigs would be allowed to roam, freely consuming organic waste and refuse. While this provided a minimal form of biodegradation, it also led to traffic hazards, increased animal waste, and of course the obvious health risks associated with a city filled with foraging livestock. Though less common in the densest parts of Rome, by your time the very idea speaks to the desperate, haphazard nature of urban waste management. You see a stray dog now sniffing at a pile of market refuse, and you quickly give it a wide berth. This entire scene speaks to the failure of municipal enforcement. The Romans had laws against littering and dumping, and the city's vigils, city watch, were theoretically responsible for policing the streets. But the sheer volume of people and the structural lack of drainage in the poor districts made these laws almost impossible to enforce. Historians still argue whether Roman urban planners understood that the immense volume of fresh water they brought into the city via the aqueducts required an equally massive and well-maintained system for its removal. They certainly built the sewers, but the connections to the poor were ignored, creating a hydrological bottleneck where the clean water met the dense population, leading to the street-level mess you are navigating right now. It's a classic example of half-completed infrastructure. You finally step onto drier ground, feeling the sun warm the back of your neck. You pass a small bakery, the smell of fresh bread a cruel temptation. You spend a moment looking into the mouth of a public fountain, watching the clean mountain fresh water spout out. It is a stunning sight, a liquid marvel that promises purity. But you know that within 100 yards, that same water will either be flushing a wealthy citizen's latrine churning in a public bath, or running down a gutter and mixing with the street's detritus. The separation between pure and foul is razor thin and constantly breached. Your eyes drift from the flowing water to the ground, and you notice a small dark stain on the wall. Nearby, a visual reminder of the chamber pot dumping section 1. A small laugh escapes you, probably the third time you've been forced into a dark historical chuckle in this section. It's an endless struggle, and even the most beautiful engineering feat can't overcome the simple logistics of 1 million people living in stacked apartments with no drainage. You've endured the obstacles, but the city in its vastness still presents new dangers, often masked by everyday objects. As you continue your walk, you realize that the waste of the city wasn't just on the ground or in the pits. It was woven into the very structure of Roman life, presenting constant health risks from surprising sources. Today, you are focused on the unexpected perils of the public space beyond the obvious sewer issues. One of the less visible threats yet, a consistent feature of Roman life for the poor, comes from the very common presence of street animals and vermin. The endless supply of organic refuse kitchen scraps, spoiled market goods, and the ubiquitous human and animal waste ensured a thriving population of rats, mice, and insects. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient cities, with their reliance on open-air markets and poor waste collection, were infested. These animals, vectors for fleas and disease, move freely between the filth of the streets, the cesspits, and your own insula apartment carrying pathogens right into your living space. The constant battle against mice and rats in your home is not just an annoyance. It's a matter of life and death, an unseen consequence of the city's sanitation failure. Section 9. You pass a bustling corner where a water carrier is filling his amphorae from a public fountain. This is your lifeblood, the clean water from the aqueducts, but the proximity to potential contamination is terrifying. You recall the lesson of the vicious cycle. The contamination is never far away. If the public fountain's overflow pipe is too close to a clogged street drain, or if the water is carried in unclean shared containers, the chain of purity is broken. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the use of specialized pots for disposal in some shops or workshops. While you had your lacinum, some small businesses that couldn't afford to be connected to the sewer might employ a large permanent pot, a dolium set into the floor or against a wall, acting as a small local cesspit. These were often poorly maintained, leading to localized, intense contamination. You might be working for a craftsman who has one of these in the back, and the constant low-level exposure to the stench and the germs is just another invisible burden you carry. The landlord's negligence regarding the main fovea, Section 4, is multiplied by 1,000 such small, neglected pits across the city. This leads us to a broader philosophical point about your existence. The Roman state built monuments to longevity and health, the baths. Section 10, the aqueducts, Section 4, and the grand temples. Yet for you, the poor Roman, the state's primary concern with waste management was ensuring the city looked good for the elite, and that the core economic functions, like providing water for the fullones in Section 8, continued. Your health and comfort were simply an externality. Historians still argue whether the Romans' pragmatic mindset focused on immediate convenience and visual grandeur blinded them to the scientific link between microorganisms and disease, or if they simply accepted high mortality as an unavoidable consequence of dense urban living. Given that even their spiritual protection was often centered on the problem, cloacina from Section 11, it suggests a profound awareness of the danger, even if they lacked the tools to solve it. You look down at your well-worn sandals, realizing they are your only defense against the filth on the street. every splash, every misstep is a reminder of the constant low-grade physical threat. You manage to find a moment of levity during your walk, laughing at the idea of the God of Flatulence, Section 11. That's probably the last light joke you'll make for a while as the reality of the perpetual struggle. Section 12 presses down again. The final section, the very end of your long day's journey, will be a quiet reflection on the totality of this exhausting reality. You are a small component in the vast, grand engine of Rome, and your waste, as we've seen, is vital to that engine. But your own well-being is not. The day is winding down once more. You've earned your meager wages, bought a handful of lentils and a crust of bread, and now you are back high up in your cramped, humid room in the insula. The noise of the city has softened, replaced by the intimate sounds of your crowded building. This final reflection is on the perpetual struggle, life's gritty end, tying together all the individual threads of filth and discomfort into the exhausting tapestry of your Roman existence. The simple, unvarnished truth is that your life as a poor Roman was a constant, tiring burden defined by poor sanitation. You existed in a world where waste management was not a utility or a civic responsibility, but a daily negotiation of risk, cost, and logistics. Every element of your life, where you lived, what you ate, how you socialized, and when you got sick, was fundamentally shaped by the failure of the world's most advanced civilization to handle the waste of its poorest citizens. Let's review the cycle one last time. It began with the desperate early morning tilt of the lacinum from your window, Section 1, adding your deposit to the liquid dangers of the street below, Section 2. Your brief escape to the public latrine, Section 3, offered flowing water, but also the unspeakable shared germ risk of the xylospongium. Back home, the reality of the toxic shared cesspit fovea beneath your building, Section 4, was a constant ticking clock, only momentarily managed by the despised night-traveling stercorarii, Section 5. We saw that your body's waste was economically vital, valued by tanners and farmers, Section 6, and providing the essential ammonia for the fullers to clean clothes, Section 8. This feces economy was built upon your misery. We then confronted the lethal consequences, the vicious cycle of contamination, leading to rampant diseases like typhoid and dysentery, Section 9, a threat only briefly masked by the ritualistic cleanliness of the public bathhouse, Section 10. Even your spiritual life was affected, requiring prayers to minor deities like cloacamaxima to ward off the dangers of the depths, Section 11. This entire journey is a stark illustration of a mainstream historical fact, the great divide between Roman engineering and Roman public health policy. They solved the supply problem aqueducts, but not the demand problem sewer connection for the masses. A quirky or fringe tidbit to end on perhaps one of the saddest is the archaeological discovery of human remains in cesspits. These are sometimes infants quietly discarded, a gruesome testament to the desperate poverty and lack of options for the urban poor. While rare, these finds illustrate the ultimate tragic intersection of life, death, and waste in your world. Historians still argue whether the Roman Empire could have sustained its massive population without relying on the crude and decentralized waste management system we've just explored. Was the sanitation failure an unavoidable consequence of a city of 1 million people packed into vertical high-density housing without modern materials? You don't care about the academic debate. You only know the smell, the risk, and the exhausting reality of it. You close your eyes, the last thought being one of deep, pervasive fatigue. You survived today. You navigated the filth. You avoided the diseases. But tomorrow the pot will be full again, the street will be waiting, and the struggle will begin again. It is a cyclical, unchangeable truth, and it is the only way you have ever known how to live or how to go to the bathroom in ancient Rome. And now, as the last remnants of our journey fade away, feel the stone beneath your feet soften. The noise of the Roman morning begins to recede, quieting the market chatter and dulling the distant scrape of the night soil cart. You no longer need to worry about the heavy ceramic pot or the precarious lean-out the high window. The stench is gently lifting, replaced by the faint, comforting scent of warm olive oil and baking bread. Let the image of the crowded insula dissolve. Forget the cold, hard marble of the communal latrine and the unsettling rush of water beneath your seat. The ancient city is settling its struggles and its marvels, slowly turning to dust, leaving behind only the quiet echo of history. You are safe now, separated by 2 millennia from the anxieties of the Roman street and the ever-present threat of the cesspit. Close your eyes. Feel the comfortable weight of your blanket, the familiar hum of the modern world, a soft reassurance. There is no longer any need to keep watch for falling debris or to worry about the cleanliness of the water. Everything is still. Everything is calm. Let your body relax completely, releasing the tension gathered from that long-ago journey. Drift down into the deepest, softest sleep. Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams.